Chapter 5. How I Learned the Most Important Secret of Salesmanship. One warm August morning, I walked into the offices of John Scott and Company, large wholesale grocers, American and Diamond Streets, Philadelphia, and asked for Mr. John Scott. One of his sons, Harry, said, "Dad's very busy this morning. Was he expecting you?" "I don't have an appointment with him," I replied, "but he requested some information from my company, and I've called to give it to him." "Well," said the son, "you've struck the wrong day. Dad's got 3 men in his office now," and just then John Scott walked through and started out into the warehouse. "Dad," called the son, "here's a man who wants to see you." "Did you want to see me, young man?" spoke the boss, glancing back at me as he hurried on through the swinging door into the warehouse. I followed him, and here is the standing-up interview that followed. Me. "Mr. Scott, my name is Betker. You requested some information from us, and I've called to give it to you," handing him the card he'd signed and returned by mail to my company. Scott, looking at the card, "Well, young man, I don't want the information, but I thought I might as well give the memorandum book your company and, But I thought I might as well get the memorandum book your company said they had set aside for me. They wrote me several letters saying they had a book with my name on it, so I sent in the card for it." Me, handing him the memo book. "Mr. Scott, these little booklets never sell any life insurance for us, but they do get us in and give us an opportunity to tell our story." Scott, "Well, there are 3 men in my office, and I'll be tied up for quite a while. Besides, it would be a waste of time to discuss insurance. I'm 63 years old, stopped buying insurance years ago. Most of my policies are paid up. My children are all grown and better able to take care of themselves than I am. There is only my wife and 1 daughter left with me now, and if anything happened to me, they would have more money than is good for them." Me, "Mr. Scott, a man who has been as successful in life as you surely must have some interests outside of your family and your business. Perhaps a hospital, religious work, missionary or charitable work, or some worthy cause. Did you ever consider that when you die your support will be withdrawn? Wouldn't this loss seriously handicap or even mean the discontinuance of some splendid work?" He didn't answer my question, but I could tell by the expression on his face that I had struck oil. He waited for me to go on. "Through our plan, Mr. Scott, you can absolutely guarantee them your support, live or die. If you live, 7 years from now you will begin to receive an income of $5,000 a year in monthly checks as long as you live. If you don't need this income, you can give it away, but if you ever should need it, it would be a great blessing to you." Scott, looking at his watch, If you want to wait a little while, I'd like to ask you some questions about this." Me, "I'd be glad to wait." About 20 minutes later, I was told to go into Mr. Scott's private office. "Now, what is your name?" he said. I said, "Betker." Scott, "Mr. Betker, you spoke of charities. I support 3 foreign missionaries, and I do give away considerable money each year to things that are very close to my heart. Now, how did you mean this plan would guarantee them my support if I should die? Then you say 7 years from now I would begin receiving an income of $5,000 a year. How much would that cost me?" When I told him the cost, he looked startled. "No, I wouldn't consider any such thing," he said. Then I asked him more questions about those 3 foreign missionaries. He seemed glad to talk about them. I asked if he'd ever visited any of the missions. No, he hadn't, but one of his sons and his daughter-in-law had charge of the mission in Nicaragua, and he was planning a trip to go down there and visit them in the autumn. Then he told me several stories about their work. I listened with great interest. Later I asked, "Mr. Scott, when you go down to Nicaragua, wouldn't you be very happy to tell your son and his little family that you had just completed arrangements, making provision that if anything happens to you, a check will come to them every month so that their work may continue without interruption? And wouldn't you like to write a letter, Mr. Scott, to the other 2 missionaries giving them the same message?" Whenever he talked about it being too much money for him to pay out, I talked more. I asked more questions about the wonderful work his foreign missionaries were doing. Finally, he bought. He made a deposit that day of $8,672 to put the plan into action. I walked out of that office. No, I didn't walk. I floated on air. I put the check in my side pocket, but held on to it with my hand. I was afraid to let go of it. I felt what a horrible nightmare it would be if I lost it before I got back to the office. I had a check for $8,672. $8,672. Only 2 years previously, I had been hoping to get a job as a shipping clerk. Truly, that sale gave me one of the biggest thrills of my life. When I reached the head office of my company, I was astounded to hear that it was one of the biggest individual sales that had ever been made in their history. I couldn't eat that night. I was awake up until almost morning. It was August 3rd, 1920. I shall never forget the date. I was the most excited man in Philadelphia. Since the sale was made by a green, blundering dub like me who had never finished grade school, it created a mild sensation. A few weeks later, I was invited to tell the story at a national sales convention in Boston. Following my talk at the convention, a nationally known salesman, Clayton M. Hunsicker, a man clearly nearly twice my age, came up and shook my hand, congratulating me on the sale. Then he told me something that I soon learned was the most profound secret of dealing with people. Said he, "I still doubt whether you understand exactly why you were able to make that sale." I asked him what he meant. He then muttered the most vital truth I have ever heard about selling. He said, "The most important secret of salesmanship is to find out what the other fellow wants, then help him find the best way to get it." In the first minute of your interview with that man, Scott, you took a blind stab and accidentally found what he wanted. Then you showed him how he could get it. You kept on talking more about it and asking more questions about it, never letting him get away from the thing he wanted. If you will always remember this one rule, selling will be easy. All during the remainder of my 3-day stay in Boston, I could think of little else except what Mr. Hunsicker had said. He was right. I hadn't really figured out why I had been able to make that sale. If Clayton Hunsicker hadn't analyzed it, interpreted for me, I might have gone on stumbling through the years. As I thought over what he said, I began to understand why I had been meeting with such terrific opposition in most of my interviews. I realized that I was just barging in, talking for a sale, without knowing or trying to find out anything about the other fellow's situation. I got so excited about this new idea I had used unknowingly, I could hardly wait until I got back to Philadelphia to use it. All this started me thinking more about John Scott and his situation. Suddenly it occurred to me that he had another job to take care of, planning the future of his business. He had gone into great detail with me about how he came to America from Ireland as a lad of 17, took a job in a small grocery store, finally starting his own business, and gradually built one of the finest wholesale grocery businesses in the East. Naturally, he had a sentimental feeling for that business. It was his life work. Surely he wanted it to continue long after he passed away. Within 30 days after I returned from the Boston Convention, I helped John Scott work out a plan to take his sons and 8 other employees into the business with him. This was climaxed by a dinner which he gave at the Manufacturers Club in Philadelphia for these key men. I was the only outside guest invited. Mr. Scott stood up after dinner and in a brief, emotional talk told his men what a happy occasion this was for him. "I have now completed plans for the future of these 2 things closest to my heart, my business and the foreign missions which I founded. The insurance I placed on the lives of all these key men in the business, including additional amounts on Mr. Scott, resulted in a sale paying me more money in one day than I had ever earned previously in an entire year of selling. The night of that dinner, I realized with full force how valuable a lesson Clayton Hunsicker had taught me. Before this, I had largely thought of selling as just a way of making a living for myself. I had dreaded to go in to see people, for I feared I was making a nuisance of myself. But now I was inspired. I resolved right then to dedicate the rest of my selling career to this principle: finding out what people want and helping them get it. I can't begin to tell you the new kind of courage and enthusiasm this gave me. Here was something more than a sales technique. It was a philosophy to live by.